Thank you for listening to IFES on elections. I'm Laura Osio. The elections that took place in Nigeria this past April were widely considered to be the best managed polls since Nigeria's return to democracy. The story that dominated the headlines, however, was the violence that erupted across the nation as opposition supporters refused to accept the results. Julia Hedlund, IFES Program Manager for Nigeria, speaks to us about the implementation of the elections and the steps that were taken to ensure a valid poll. Julia, domestic and international observers agree that these elections that Nigeria just had were some of the best elections that have been implemented in the country. Can you tell us why they were so successful?
Sure. I was in Nigeria for the elections in April. They were held on April 9th, April 16th, and in April 26th. I did observe the National Assembly elections and the presidential elections in Abuja and Lagos. And they were, for the most part, the process was really good and was really well received by Nigerians and by international observers. Some of the indicators that these elections were more credible and more democratic than previous elections are that the ruling party, PDP, did lose seats. Opposition parties won seats. If PDP lost, opposition parties won. And that some incumbent candidates lost their seats as well. There were a lot of changes that INEC, the Independent National Electoral Commission, undertook this time around under Chairman Jega's leadership that contributed to these elections being so credible. A major one was that they redid the whole voter register in January of this year. The previous register was really seen as fraudulent and had lots of fake voters in it, like Mike Tyson and Hillary Clinton. So it was not accepted, and they had to redo the register in January, and they included fingerprints and lots of other checks that would cut down on fraud. So the register was accepted by civil society largely and by political parties, and so that was the first step to getting these elections to be much better. They also implemented a new system. Well, the system had been used in the previous successful elections in '92, the modified open ballot system, where voters had to come in the morning starting at 9 to be accredited, where the polling workers found their names on the register and one finger was marked. And then they had to wait around until 12 where they could actually start voting. And the system was implemented to keep people from going around to different polling stations and voting multiple times. And Nigerians were really pleased with it. They really are concerned about fraud and concerned about multiple voting, and this really seemed to make them feel more comfortable with the results of the election. Another important difference this time around was the transparency of the counting of ballots. Counting was done at each polling station, and voters were encouraged to vote and protect their vote, which meant that voters would vote and then they would stick around to watch the counting of the ballots. And the collation of national results was actually done in Abuja on live television. It didn't make for very engaging TV watching, but it was there out in the open, and it made people really feel like everything was done in a transparent manner. And finally, the security was much better this time around than in previous elections. Although there were some incidents of violence throughout the election process, a lot of it came after the election, and so the polling process itself was not very much marred by violence, partially because all of the national security forces were pulled in and all of them really helped out during the election. Every polling station I went to had numerous security officials from different branches, so it was pretty orderly overall.
What can you tell us about the violence and why it erupted?
Violence did break out in the north after the results of the elections were becoming clear and it looked like General Buhari was going to lose. I'm no expert, and there's lots of conjecture about why the violence broke out. It did seem to be among the youth, maybe unemployed, lower socioeconomic parts of society, and they just started rioting in the streets. But I can say that it has died down since then, and overall I don't think it really marred the positive feelings about the elections.
Speaking of which, what was the mood like in Nigeria during that week?
It was really great. I was really happy to have been there during that time because there was a really positive and optimistic mood in the country, and a lot of people were voting for the first time. some of them, elderly or older people who had never voted before because they never thought their vote would count before. And this time around, they went out, they waited in long lines, and they were happy to do so because they thought finally their vote was going to count. So it was very exciting.
That's great. Thank you, Julia.